and thanks for joining. We will today be presenting our new sourcing hub, our relaunched sourcing hub, and give you an introduction how you can be part of the sourcing hub network and give input and stay updated on risk data. Before I start, I'll just give you a quick introduction to Preferred by Nature to those of you who doesn't know us already. We are a mission-driven international non-profit organization. We work on solutions for managing lands and businesses more sustainable, and we've done that for over 25 years. We have over 350 plus full-time staff based in 30 countries, and we work in more than 100 countries across 10 different programs, ranging from project work to certifications on tourism, forestry, agriculture. So many different sectors and areas related to sustainability. My name is Ditte Steffensen, and I'm the Sourcing Hub manager. I will be doing the presentation today. And with me, I have Letitia Calvo, who is our Senior Responsible Sourcing Specialist. And she'll be managing questions throughout the webinar and collect questions for our final Q&A session. The topics we'll be going through today is that we'll first introduce our new sourcing hub. I'll then take you through our sourcing hub networks, and we'll talk a bit about the future of the sourcing hub and our risk assessments, and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. Our sourcing hub, our new sourcing hub, is funded by European Union's LIFE program under the LIFE Legal Wood project. A few practical information before I start the tour of the Preferred by Nature sourcing hub is that we will record these webinars and make them available after the presentation. We'll only publish the recordings of the presentations and not the Q&A session. If you have any technical issues, you can contact Julie Tjerskov Hansen on the email on this slide. And just so you're all aware, you're in listen-only mode, meaning you will not be able to ask questions orally. However, you can, during any time of the webinar, ask questions in the Q&A function. We can try and respond to questions during the webinar, but we will collect questions at the end for the Q&A session. So that's where we will respond to the majority of the questions. We will focus on questions related to the sourcing hub. If you have specific questions on risk assessments, data, conclusions and evidence, please submit that through the feedback function of the sourcing hub. And I'll show you how this works later on. The way you ask questions is to press the Q&A function of the Zoom, and then you can ask your question in the field below. Quickly on the history of our sourcing hub and risk data. We've been involved in risk assessment development since 2007, where we initially started primarily with FSC and control wood risk assessments. We then launched our own sourcing hub in 2017, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that already. It contains mainly risk assessment on timber and on legality. But we also do have some risk assessment for palm, soy, and beef related to some selected countries. Our risk assessment was very much targeted towards fulfilling the EUTR. So we've increasingly over the years, as we got more experience, we've put more focus on risk mitigation. We developed tools for companies. We have a risk mitigation guide. We have document guides. Which will all be available in the new sourcing hub as well. Our current risk assessment are based on the legal source framework. it has 5 different categories that we evaluate for each risk assessment. These categories comply with the EUTR as well, and we have then further defined these with subcategories so that we are very specific when we evaluate legality for each country. So we end up with 21 subcategories that we systematically go through for all countries. Then we do have additional indicators, traceability indicator and processing indicators. And then for some countries, we will have these additional to these 21 indicators. Going forward, we'll make a bit of a change because we want to expand our risk assessment to not only cover legality, but also sustainability. And so our future risk assessment will be based on what we have under our sustainability framework, which is a new framework covering legality and sustainability. What will be, or what we will have for both of our current risk assessment and our future risk assessment is how we conclude risks. So we will have low risk conclusions and specified risk conclusions. For each indicator, when we assess them, we will either conclude low risk, and that's if there is an issue identified, but that's just temporary, if it's unusual and unsystematic, if it's limited in impact, or if it's officially controlled by the authorities, then we say that's a low risk issue. However, on the other hand, if it affects a wide area, if it causes significant damage, if it indicates an absence or breakdown of the legal system, if it's not corrected or adequately responded to, or if it has a large significant impact, then we say it's specified risk. And I mentioned this briefly before, but this is what we currently have available on the Sourcing Hub. We have our timber legality risk assessments. We have tools, which is applicable legislation, risk mitigation guide, and document guide. This is information on risk data, all available in PDF formats. And they will be integrated into a new system. So you might ask, why do we need to develop a new Sourcing Hub? Well, we want to be able to have a platform where we can present a large set of risk data in a more user-friendly way. So I mentioned before, we're going from legality to sustainability risk assessments, and we want to be able to make risk assessments for a larger set of commodities as well, and not just focus on timber. So this can create very large data sets that we want to be able to show in a more user-friendly way. We're also introducing filtering functions so that it's something that can be tailored to specific company supply chains, and you can pull out the data that's interesting for you. We also want to present data to fit the management process of the user. So instead of having to go through a long PDF document and read the full risk evaluation and then eventually end up with the conclusion on whether there's risk or low risk, we will instead start with presenting the risk, and then you can dig down into the details after having the overview of risks available. We also want to be able to update the data on the platform more easily. So updating full PDF report can be quite cumbersome, and it's a lengthy process. While having this in a database and show all the risk data online, we'll be able to focus on just some criteria or indicators. And we hope that this can allow for updating the data more easily, which is of use for you as well. And also very importantly is that we want to have a flexible platform that ensures that we can adapt the platform for future requirements. So now, as you're probably aware, we have the new EUDR coming up, and that's of course something we want to be able to adapt the Sourcing Hub to, so that our platform continues to be relevant also for future legislation. So I will now take you to the Sourcing Hub platform and show you the new functions. There it is. There we are. So this is our platform and the landing page of the platform. You find the data relevant to you through going to our country risk profile tab here. And you can then select the commodities that you're interested in. So right now we have cattle, palm oil, soy, and timber, but only timber is updated to fit the system. Cattle, palm oil, and soy currently are only available in the old PDF formats that we had available before. So I choose timber, and then you can choose the country of harvest. And also here we have entered some countries into the system, while the ones that we haven't entered into the system, some of the older risk assessment, will be available in PDF. When we do new updates and have new countries risk assessments available, we'll enter them into the system. So I'll choose Vietnam as an example. Something new is that you can also choose a transit country. If you do that, choose C. Choosing transit country will allow you to see the risks related to trade, transport, and processing for that country. While when you choose the country of harvest, it will show all risks related to the forest level as well. Then press View Details, and I'll take you to the country page. You can see here there's different tabs: Country Overview, Verify Your Supply Chain tab, Risk Overview, and Risk Mitigation. On the country overview, you have basic information related to that country. So we have our risk score, which is our own internal score based on the amount of indicators where risk has been identified. If it's 100, it will be low risk. If it's 0, it will be high risk. It doesn't express the number of risk for that country. That you'll see in the box at the right here. So for Vietnam, in this case, we have 27 risks identified. We also have download files available. So these are the old PDF versions that we had available on the old sourcing hub. We'll make that available also here. And there's some documents that are in original language of the country of that's been under assessment. So that's available as well. We have on this page as well general information about the country and the relevant sector, so the forest sector in this case. And you can see more by click View More. Then we have a description of source types. And the source types is the origin of timber in Vietnam. In this case, timber can only legally originate from plantations. So here it's state-owned plantation, private company-owned plantations, and individuals' household-owned plantations. And legislation and our risk will differ between these source types. And therefore, we've included this because that's important for you to know when you want to see what's the risk for your specific supply chain. And we have some basic information of armed conflicts, voluntary partnership agreements, certifications, bans and restrictions, and a new box on species as well. Species will appear in this box if we have identified specific risk in our risk assessments related to these species. It's a box that we're still working on improving, so you will be able to see, is it a sightless species? And then this column with whether it's an IUCN red list species and whether there's any special attention to be paid to the species is something that still has to be filled out. So we're working on that, and that's coming up. We have map of the country and deforestation data, which we have from Global Forest Watch. And then we have an overview over the risk mitigation options that we have identified. So you see the different source types and the number of risks associated to each of these source types. In the following columns here, you see the suggested risk mitigation options accumulated. So you can see here for Vietnam, like primarily risk can be mitigated through document verification. it doesn't mean that you have to collect 73 documents, for example, for state-owned plantations. But there can be different options or actions that you'll have to do to mitigate risk related. Like, for example, there's 5 different things you have to check related to 5 different risks related to one document. So that's the number here is an accumulated statistics of the risk mitigation options. If you want to see the details of what the risks are and the risk mitigation options, you'll have to go to, I'm scrolling up here, to the other tabs, risk overview and risk mitigation. This tab on verifying your supply chain, I will not go into the details of that. There's some information that can be relevant for you if you are still working on mapping your supply chain. So what to consider, what to look out for, and how to keep your supply chain verified. I'll now jump to risk overview. So this tab still has the filtering function of Vietnam and a transit country DRC. And here it will display all the risks identified. It's organized by the categories of the legality that I showed you earlier, and under each of these subcategories. It's possible to filter these risks. So if you know you're not sourcing any of these species, for example, you can deselect them. You can also deselect source types, and then only risk will show for the source types that is relevant for your supply chain. It will show, as I mentioned before, all the risks related to Vietnam at forest level. And when you don't then scroll down here to trade and transport, you can also see risks related to the transit country that you chose. In this case, DRC. If you don't want to have this list with both Vietnam and DRC showing, you can deselect DRC and it will update. And now here, now we only have the risk for Vietnam showing. You can click a risk to see more details, and this would be on the right-hand side. So here, an example of risk is the lack of sustainable forest management plan and approval by the appropriate authority for Vietnam. You can see the details of the risk evaluation here, and also the references that we use to reach this conclusion. It's applicable, this risk is applicable to privately owned plantations and state-owned plantations. And when you want to, if you want to mitigate this risk, in this case, you would need to use document verification. So you need to obtain the Sustainable Forest Management Plan. Then we provide some information on what you need to consider when you mitigate the risk and when you verify this document. If you want to see the background on what's then the legal requirement related to Sustainable Forest Management Plan, go to you scroll down, you find description of legal requirements. You can see that here. And we also have listed the legally required documents and the applicable legislation, which you can click to get more information on. Our legally required documents is listed for all that's legally required, but the ones you need for a mitigating risk, we have tried to obtain copies of these documents and provided more information on what to consider when you use this document in your due diligence implementation. So if I click that, we'll see that there's some information here on what's the title in original language, who holds the document, who is the document signed by, and who issues the document. What are the key considerations when checking this document? And that's for checking the document and using it in due diligence, in implementing due diligence. And what's the purpose and the content of the document? We also have covered that. And if there is anything that's relevant to consider, like is there any limitation when you want to use it as evidence, then we will include that as well. We're working on the layout of this page as well. So apologies here for this should have been in bullet points, but the information is here and we will and we will improve this going forward. However, something that's also available now is copy of the documents. So you'll be able to click that, and you'll see some documents are translated in their details, and some you will just be able to see how this document look like. So you'll be able to evaluate whether this is actually the accurate document. For a sustainable forest management plan, you'll probably need to have a Vietnamese-speaking person to look at this anyway. But at least I'll give you an example of what to look out for. I'll close this tab again, and it brings you then back to the sourcing hub. So this was the risk overview. It has, I showed you here before, the risk mitigation options listed for each risk. And in this case, it's document verification. It could also be, if I look at, take a risk from timber harvesting activities, you'll see that the risk mitigation options, now it jumped, and this is the risk on protected sites and species. And the risk mitigation options for this risk is more complex. So here it would require document verification, field verification, scientific testing, stakeholder consultation, and supply chain mapping. So you of course can see some risks can be mitigated through just documents, and some you'll have to go to the field. It's important to remember when you look at this that this is of course something you need to take in, but you also need to be aware that it's still your responsibility to make sure that the risks identified have been mitigated for your supply chain. So you need to see if this is if additional actions should be implemented for your supply chain. These are the risks. Sorry, the mitigation options. We have, though, as you probably noticed, also a risk mitigation tab. These mitigation options are organized under each risk. You go to the risk mitigation tab. Here, the mitigation options are organized by mitigation type. So mitigation like document verification, stakeholder consultation, field verification, scientific testing, and supply chain mapping. That's all types of mitigation options that's relevant for when you source from Vietnam. And if we look at document verification, it will list all the documents relevant. So in this case, a certificate of land use right, and ownership of house and other assets attached to land use. And here, this document is related to a specific risk, and there's a bit of information on what you need to consider. If we scroll down a bit, you'll be able to see this example in the packing list. There's more risk associated to the packing list, or I should maybe say that you can use the packing list to address several risks. And there will be different actions that you should implement or verify when you use the packing list to mitigate these risks. So getting this overview will help you to know what kind of risk can be mitigated through the packing list, but you need to remember that it doesn't mean that if you have the packing list and you apply or you carry out one of these mitigation options, it doesn't necessarily mean that you mitigated the risk of incorrect packing list. It might be that you have to look at several documents. So to get that information, you will have to go back to the risk overview, where you would be able to see if several documents or several stakeholders should be contacted to mitigate the full risk. So this risk mitigation tab is to provide you an overview of each of the actions, or each of the types of mitigation options that are available. So you can see here, you can mark mitigation action as done. To be able to do that, you'll need to be signed into the system. And then you'll have to log in. And I already have registered, so I'll just log into the system. And when you're logged into the system, you'll be able to save a supply chain. So I've just done 2 saved test supply chains here. And the good thing about saving a supply chain is that you don't have to check and search for a country and a transit country. You can just click the supply chain and it will take you directly to the country you're interested in. It can also show you how many, if you choose mitigation actions that's done in the mitigation tab, you can see how many of the mitigation actions have you done out of the total one suggested. And you can see here where I've sourced from Vietnam with DRC as transit country has 171 mitigation options, but that's because it's both a transit country and country of origin. I'll show you how you can save a supply chain here. So you go to country risk profile, you select the relevant commodity, you select the country you're interested in. I can choose Cameroon, for example. And I actually forgot to say or tell you before how you can choose a date to see past risk assessments, and that's click that here, and then you'll be able to choose historical risk data if available. And since we've just launched the sourcing hub, we don't have historical risk data integrated into the system now, but going forward, you'll be able to see the history of risk development for a country. View the details once you've selected the country and the commodity, then you enter a supply chain title and say save supply chain. This will then allow you, when you're under the risk mitigation tab, to mark as done. When you then go to the landing page, you'll get the overview of the supply chains. So I just created this test 2 Cameroon supply chain. And you can see I've done now 2 out of the 107 mitigation options suggested. Another important function of the sourcing hub is that you'll be able to submit feedback. And you can do that whether it's related to risk data or comments on the platform. Just enter the subject and the message and send it to us. You can send feedback whether you're logged into the system or if you're not logged into the system. It doesn't make a difference. And lastly, we have the country overview here. Again, you select the commodity you're interested in and say explore results. And here you'll see an overview of the countries entered into the system. For the country where we've entered the full information into the system, you'll see information of the number of risk species and low risk indicators as well. And for all others, we have risk score and CPI, and that's Transparency International CPI added. You can then expand this and get a quick overview of the country, and you can enter the full country overview country page through this channel as well. So another function that's coming up soon is that you'll be able to download all this risk assessment data into a PDF. So currently that's not possible to do, but we expect this function to be ready next month, so in May. And having it in a, sorry, I said it in a PDF, I mean in an Excel. So you'll be able to filter risks, mitigation options, list of legislation, relevant documents, all that will be in tabs in the Excel sheet. And this is the main function of our new sourcing hub that I've been through now. Another thing we want to put focus on and want to integrate more into our system is our sourcing hub networks. And our sourcing hub networks is an informal network to stay updated and to provide input into the sourcing hub. It's a way for us to reach out to people and share information, but also for you to get input and reach us with questions. So the way you can stay updated is you can do this by different means. You can either sign up to our Sourcing Hub newsletter, and the newsletter you'll get general information on the Sourcing Hub and everything that's relevant to the Sourcing Hub. So this would be new risk assessment, updates of risk assessment, webinars on the EUDR or on information just relevant to risk data. But this would be all updates on the Sourcing Hub. Whether if you register on the Sourcing Hub, you can indicate the countries you're interested in, the regions you're interested in, and the commodities you're interested in. And then you will get updates as you have indicated an interest. So if you're only interested in cacao in Africa, then that's what you get updated on. You can also save your supply chain, as I showed you before, and then you will get updates on that's relevant to that supply chain only. If you delete the supply chain, you will stop getting the updates. And lastly, you can join webinars. So we are going forward as well, make different webinars on, well, fake documents, scientific testing, EUDR, or new risk assessment that we develop. So yeah, it's just about joining them. And then providing input, going the other way around. You can do that by submitting feedback on the Sourcing Hub. You can join webinars as well. Some webinars, or all webinars, will have a Q&A session, and some webinars will have room for discussions as well. And you can also write directly to the Sourcing Hub email, which is sourcinghub.preferredbynature.org. And the information that's relevant to share would be information that's relevant to risks, requirement, and mitigation measure. So we do not, if you disagree with our conclusions, we would need to have evidence and argumentation for why we should change it. So we don't change a risk conclusion if you say, I just disagree. We will need more substantiated evidence for that. You can also ask questions. If there's something you don't understand in the risk argumentation, if there's information is missing, we'll be happy to hear that as well. But also if you have suggestions for improving the platform, that's a valuable input as well. I do want to note that whatever feedback you submit to the Sourcing Hub team, whether it's through the submit feedback function or the email, it will not be made public or posted directly on the Sourcing Hub. We will always evaluate the feedback before we do any updates to the database. We'll also not make public the name and organization of the stakeholder submitting the feedback unless that's agreed with the stakeholder. And we aim to respond to input within 3 working days. And why would you want to be part of the Sourcing Hub network? Well, first of all, it's a way to stay updated. And signing up to these news channels doesn't mean you will have to provide feedback to the Sourcing Hub. You can just get updated on the risk data development. But if you do contribute with input, you will contribute to ensuring free availability of good quality risk data. And that's something that will level the playing field for everyone applying due diligence. And it's also something that can create discussions and better understanding of risk and risk mitigation for us and for you as well. We very much value the input from stakeholders because it does improve the understanding of risks and mitigation measures with valuable input from the field and the supply chain. When we would develop risk assessment, we always work together with someone from the relevant country and with knowledge, who has knowledge on the commodities that are being evaluated. However, keeping the risk assessment updated, we will need input from stakeholders. So it's important for us to know, like, what's the situation in real life and how does it look today? What are the challenges of applying risk mitigation measures? If you see risk mitigation measures you do not find is easy, or if you find not possible to implement, we will be happy to hear that. And we will be very happy to hear suggestions on what else could be done. Another way to support the sourcing hub is by supporting the sourcing hub financially. So we develop these risk assessment, and updating risk data and making these available can only be done if we do have funding for it. We continuously seek funding from from larger donors. But as a company, it's also possible to support the sourcing hub. And that can be general development of the sourcing hub platform, general maintenance. It can also be if you're interested in a specific risk assessment for a specific country and commodity. You'll be able to fund such risk assessment or partly fund a risk assessment. So if there is an express interest in a commodity risk assessment, we can reach out to more companies to try and collect funding for the development of that risk assessment. And here at the end of my presentation, I want to talk a bit about the future of the sourcing hub. So we released this new platform, and we are already working on adapting the sourcing hub to our sustainability framework risk assessment. And as I mentioned before, our sustainability framework covers not just legality, but also sustainability, and it can be adapted to other commodities. But that's the whole purpose with our sustainability framework, is that that will be adapted to different commodities. So we plan to have many more different commodities uploaded into the system of risk assessment for many different commodities, and also for many additional countries. We also want to make sure that our platform is adapted to be relevant for meeting the EUDR requirements, so that when the EUDR is implemented, the sourcing hub will still be a relevant place to go. And we have some additional ideas for future development of the sourcing hub. So, I mean, we want to add more filtering functions into the system. We want to add deforestation data, and we want to link certification scheme to our risk mitigation data. And that means we want to add into the system how the risk picture would be if you source certified. If you source FSC certified timber or ISPO certified palm oil, what risk level do your supply chain have then? We also want to pull in landscape level data and deforestation data to create an advanced map function. And also, we're considering to add digital tools to allow for supply chain mapping and traceability tools into the system, or at least integrated to the system, so that risk data can be pulled into a digital traceability tool. And lastly, provide quality newsfeed and alerts, so make the platform more dynamic and alive.